most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms wherein they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that as. Just ignore it if I mispronounce something. It's definitely already happened. My father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and a sort of attention forever. I wanted no more righteous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffectionate scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that registers earthquakes thousands of miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability, which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. I don't know if I can keep up a whisper for this long, guys. Oh my god. I'm gonna do my best to power through. I might have to make a part 1 and a part 2. We'll see. It's 18 pages and I've read 2 and I'm losing my voice. My family has been prominent, well-to-do in the middle western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we've descended from the Dukes of Buckle, I don't know. But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the Gather hard-boiled painting that hangs in my father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father. Sorry, I don't know if you care to see it or not. And a little later, I participated in that delay Teutonic migration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles sunshine and the great burst of leaves growing on trees, just as things grow fast in movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read, for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breathing, giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood
speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, added to the impression of fractiousness he conveyed. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, even toward people he liked, and there were men at New Haven who had hated his guts. Now, don't think my opinion on these matters is final, he seemed to say. Just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are, we were in the same senior society, and while we were never intimate, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to be like him, with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own. We talked for a few minutes on the sunny porch. I've got a nice place here, he said, his eyes flashing about restlessly. Turning me around by one arm, he moved a broad, flat hand along the front vista, including in its sweep a sunken Italian garden, a half-acre of deep, pungent rose, and a snub-nosed motorboat that bumped the tide offshore. It belonged to Demain, the oil man. He turned me around again, politely and abruptly. We'll go inside. We walked through a high hallway into a bright rosy-colored space, fragilely bound into the house by a French window at either end. The windows were ajar and gleaming white against the fresh grass outside that seemed to grow a little way into the house. A breeze blew through the home, blew curtains in at one end and out the other like pale flags, twisting them up toward the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling, and then rippled over the wine-colored rug, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. I must have stood for a few moments, listening to the whip and snap of the curtains and the groan of a picture on the wall. Then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows, and the caught wind died out about the room, and the curtains and the rugs and the two young women ballooned slowly to the floor. The younger of the two was a stranger to me. She was extended full length at her end of the divan, completely motionless, and with her chin raised a little, as if she were balancing something on it, which was quite likely to fall. If she saw me out of the corner of her eye, she gave no hint of it indeed. I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. The other girl, Daisy, made an attempt to rise. She leaned slightly forward with a conscientious expression. Then she laughed, an absurd, charming little laugh, and I laughed too, and came into the room.
Sorry if the camera angle changed. I had to stop filming because I ran out of storage. That's literally always happening to me, even though I just bought more. But anyways, I think I'm gonna finish reading like maybe one or two more pages, and then I'll make like a part 2 of chapter 1. I'm gonna go back to soft-spoken. It's so much easier.
She laughed again as if she had said something very witty, and held my hand for a moment, looking up into my face, promising that there was no one in the world she so much wanted to see. That was a way she had. She hinted in a murmur that the surname of the balancing girl was Baker. I've heard it said that Daisy's murmur was only to make people lean toward her, an irrelevant criticism that made it no less charming. At any rate, Miss Baker's lips fluttered. She nodded at me almost imperceptibly, and then quickly tipped her head back again, and the object she was balancing had obviously tottered a little and given her something of a fright. Again, a sort of apology rose from my lips. Almost any exhibition of complete self-sufficiency draws a stunned tribute for me. I looked back at my cousin, who began to ask me questions in her low, thrilling voice. It was a kind of voice that the ears follow up and down, as if each speech is an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. Her face was sad and lovely, with bright things in it, bright eyes and a bright, passionate mouth, but there was an excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget, a singing compulsion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had done gay, sorry, the use of gay in a context is so funny to me. A promise that she had done gay, exciting things just a while since, and that there were gay, exciting things hovering in the next hour. I told her how I had stopped off in Chicago for a day on my way east, and how a dozen people had sent their love through me. Do they miss me? She cried ecstatically. The whole town is desolate. All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a persistent wail all night long along the North Shore. How gorgeous! Let's go back, Tom, tomorrow. Then she added irrelevantly, You ought to see the baby. I'd like to. She's asleep. She's 3 years old. Haven't you ever seen her? Never. Well, you ought to see her. She's... Tom Buchanan, who had been hovering restlessly around the room, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. What are you doing, Nick? I'm a bondman. Who with? I told him. Never heard of them, he remarked decisively. This annoyed me. You will, I answered shortly. You will if you stay in the East. Oh, I'll stay in the East, don't you worry, he said, glancing at Daisy and then back at me as if he were alert for something more. I'd be a goddamn fool to live anywhere else. At this point, Miss Baker said, Absolutely, with such suddenness that I started. It was the first word that she had uttered since I came into the room. Evidently, it surprised her as much as it did me, for she yawned and with a series of rapid, deft movements stood up into the room. I'm stiff, she complained. I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember. Don't look at me, Daisy retorted. I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon. No thanks, said Miss Baker to the 4 cocktails just in the pantry. I'm absolutely in training. Her host looked at her incredulously. You are. He took down his drink as if it were a drop in the bottom of a glass. How you ever get anything done is beyond me. I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what she had got done. I enjoyed looking at her. Her gray, sun-strained eyes looked back at me with polite, reciprocal curiosity out of a wan, charming, discounted face. It occurred to me now that I had seen her or a picture of her somewhere before. You live in West Egg, she remarked contemptuously. I know somebody there. I don't know a single... You must know Gatsby. Alright guys, I think